This episode of the BeanCast is brought to you by Artisanal Agency, the exclusive representative of the This Week in Tech podcast network. Reach Twit.tv's tech-savvy, affluent, highly engaged audience by booking your campaign now. Visit artisanalagency.com to find out more. Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Visit them on the web at recursivesquirrel.com. Episode 577, Lost in Lowe's. For Monday, January 27th, 2020, it's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob Norton. Thanks for joining us. The ability of location vendors to continue providing insight on consumer movement and proximity remains in question as they face off with mobile OS vendors providing increased transparency to users. But will it matter in the end? Tonight we'll discuss. Also, the call for influencers who advocate for causes, Google's new look for search ads, whether killing your mascot makes sense, plus this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the founder and principal of the idea integration company, Mr. Saul Colt. Hi, Saul.
Hey, Bob. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Now, next, he's the author of 2 books, a longtime contributor to AdPulp, a loving dog owner, and freelance copywriter, Mr. Dan Goldgeier. Dan, hi.
Hey, Bob. It's always good to be back on the show.
And finally, he's the founder and chairman of Streamlined Media, as well as president and CEO of Bold Culture, Mr. Darren Martin Jr. Hi, Darren.
Hey, Bob. Happy New Year. Good to be back. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, glad you can make it back. It's been a while, so
yeah,
I'm very pleased to have you back on the program.
Absolutely.
Well, let's jump right in. As we've discussed many times previously on the show, the future accuracy of location marketing data is coming into question now due to new controls in both Android and iOS devices. The question is, on my mind, how serious is the issue for marketers? Darren, the latest stats are saying that when these warnings about location tracking appear on phones, users are still accepting it roughly half of the time. Now, I choose to say accepting it. Every article you read says they're rejecting it half the time or 40% of the time. But, you know, the other way to look at it is they're saying okay to it. Isn't that something to be hopeful about, or is that just another sign that no one ever reads their dialogue boxes? I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
No, I think it's something to be hopeful about. I think that Apple, I'm an Apple user, so I've received the update, and they make it a point to be very blatant about who's using your location services, how long they've been doing it in the background. And so you definitely have to take, a stance on if you want that to be tracked immediately, and you can basically create those settings. I think that users or consumers are really taking hold of their privacy, especially as we become a bit more educated in a larger digital media ecosystem around consumer privacy. So I think it's a win for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like it is. I mean, I might just be hopeful like you and living in a dream world, but it does mean to me that users are not as upset about the tracking as maybe we fear that they are. Now, Saul, what would you say to that? I mean, it's just like, is location tracking very too invasive? Is it something that needs these controls to be put upon it? And do location vendors have a lot to worry about?
So I'm going to go the other direction and say it really comes down to trust. So I read the dialogue boxes and I'm very careful about who I allow and don't allow. So I'm not a complete no on everybody and I'm not a complete yes on everybody. So to me, it's interesting to see that all the tools and all the things that give marketers confidence that they no longer to build relationships with their customers are slowly being taken away. When if you built a relationship with your customer, you'd absolutely have them say, yeah, I don't care if you know where I am. Because like personally, like I've blocked Uber because I don't necessarily want them following me everywhere I go. Even though I only ever use Uber when I'm traveling or if I'm in a bind, but other brands, I'm like, I don't care because I kind of have a better feeling about them.
And
I,
go ahead, Darren.
yeah, I was going to just really agree with Saul on the case of it being trust and the idea that I'll go back to iPhones, especially having that blatant block there. You do have to choose what apps you want to interact with. I think, unfortunately, the apps that we're talking about, the big players like a Google or a Facebook or even an Uber and many of those other companies are really utilities when it comes into the digital ecosystem. And so people want to be able to use Instagram so that they can add their location services there, so they can tell people and their friends where they are. So I definitely agree with Saul. It's a trust thing, but it's also from a utility perspective as well. Many of these individuals use these apps many times a day, and so it's advantageous for them to go ahead and accept the location tracking.
Now, what about the local vendors? Maybe it's a big box retailer, maybe it's a small local vendor, but they're trying to get your location data as well, and they're trying to use that location data to convince you to come into their store, to help you map yourself around their aisles. I mean, there's lots of use cases for that type of usage. So, Dan,
Yeah.
what do you think about that? I mean, it's just like, is that kind of outside the circle of trust when you're getting these random pop-ups saying, Lowe's would like you to allow for this Bluetooth tracking to go on while you're in their store?
Yeah, that gets into a little creepy. I think that what you just said, never mind Lowe's, I think it's the local restaurants, the places that you may be walking around. When you get it, if I'm on my Facebook feed, I will often see ads for places that I'm nearby. And those, the smaller players are the ones that will find themselves a little bit on the outside looking in. But location functionality is the key to a lot of the most valuable apps that I use. I mean, without them, it certainly doesn't work. So I think that, I go to Lowe's. I don't use the Lowe's app, so I don't really know that. I don't usually tend to get a lot of pop-ups in my face.
And to be fair, I don't know what Lowe's is doing. I just use them as a random example. So I don't want to be unfair to Lowe's.
I understand that. I guess my point is that I don't get a lot of pop-up messages about people trying to reach me where I am. If I see things that are related to my location, they tend to be in Twitter and Facebook, and maybe that's just me. And that I think is the most valuable for local based businesses that really want to know where I am.
But there's a lot of variables in this. Obviously, you have to track how savvy technologically some of these people are and what kind of notifications they've gotten. Because so I'm an Apple user, and through my phone, I've gotten two types of notification. I've gotten the Bluetooth one that says, is this okay? But I've also gotten some crazy ones that say, like this app has tracked you 79 times in the last week, at various locations. And that's always a hard no for me, because it's one thing. It's one thing if the app, like, Instagram, they're allowing you to tell people where you are. I stopped tagging my photos like a long time ago and stuff like that. But when it says that they've followed you around for 3 days, that sends a very strong message to a lot of people and I'd love to know, that 50% of people don't opt out or do opt in, whatever you want to call it. I'd love to know what the percentage is based on the one that shows them just how many times they've been sort of, snooped on in a 72-hour period.
It goes back to that old mantra about data collection. I mean, you shouldn't try to collect all the data that's available. You should only collect the data that you need. And it seems that a lot of vendors or a lot of apps out there or a lot of these location monitoring services are just collecting too much data. I mean, it's not focused, it's not succinct, and maybe if they start doing that, people will be more inclined to say yes to these notifications. Let me take that a little bit further. Is anybody aware what the location data vendors are doing to combat this situation? I mean, is any of it working? Darren, do you have any thoughts?
So I think it's actually similar to what we're talking about with things such as CCPA coming into the play, right? And the privacy laws there. They're going from, let's say, first party data to now maybe third party data, or in this case, it would be from GPS data to IP address data, right? Which of course is not as accurate, but it allows you to create some context around where someone is. And to your point, Bob, I think with having many data points, people were able to become more exact, but then in becoming more exact, you became more creepy, right? We're able to track where someone is every 79 times. With going to an IP address basis, what you're going to do is say that this person could be within, let's say, a range of 1,000 kilometers or X, Y, and Z, which makes your targeting and your marketing have to be more contextual versus very exact. And it really goes back into traditional media buying and planning now, right? You know some things about your audience, and you have to take those points to create a contextual campaign that hopefully drives the needle. So that's where individuals from a mobile perspective are going, again, from that first party GPS data to the more inaccurate but a range and in IP address. And digital media players on the internet space, of course, from a web perspective, have to do the same thing when they're thinking about the laws that are coming down for privacy, particularly. So it's an interesting time.
But you speak about privacy. I read an article recently, and I'm blanking on the company name, but it basically said they're going to look at your photos, do like reverse photo search, and try to find identifying landmarks so they know where you are, and then push you ads based on that, so they know that you're in this neighborhood and you probably have this sort of income level, and they from your pictures you like this, that, and the next thing. So from a standpoint of privacy, like we're in science fiction territory where like just as we close the door, 7 others open. So I think the whole privacy thing is, I just sort of giggle every time people say we're getting stronger on privacy, because just like hackers and pirates and every bad movie of the week and stuff like that, like they're smarter than the people closing the loops. And
yeah, and
for sure.
And related to that was that I guess it was the New York Times last month or 2 months ago that tracked Pentagon workers, every step that they made from their home to their office, and it doesn't really matter how many apps you use. They'll just the fact that you have a smartphone means that people will find a way to track you.
It's not even scary. A smartphone. You're right, Dan. It's not even a smartphone. It could be, as Saul was saying, just walking around. And we talk about Amazon, of course, in contract with the government, in doing surveillance, right? And that's more from a camera perspective. Police in local communities are doing that now from cameras and trying to do facial identification. And so I totally agree that we're not going to move away from privacy. There always are going to be loops. And when we're thinking about government, or when we're thinking about making money, there's always going to be a case where if something gets blocked, there's always going to be another solution that they can continue to reach those people so they can make more money.
Well, that's a good. Go ahead, Saul. I'll make my point in a second.
Well, I was just going to say that I got an email yesterday from Nexus, which is the Canadian version of Global Entry. So it's you're pre-approved to sort of get across the border a little quicker, and they're moving to a new system where it's completely facial recognition, so it's even going to be quicker, but you have to go and let them scan your face. So I'm cool with it, because I just assume they have all that data anyways, and this is their sort of clever way of just sort of like letting us know they have it. But now there's a document or a server somewhere with a zillion perfect face recognition examples and all these things. Like we've lost the war. Unless you want to live like a bushman, like we should just stop pretending that there is any privacy. Like, who can even cheat on their spouse anymore? It's like become an antiquated thing.
You know, something that's very fascinating to me is the move to 5G. Now, I know 5G is a big hype machine right now, and I'm not sure whether or not it's actually going to deliver on many of the promises that it's offering. But it seems to me that this whole question of location tracking with your device may be moot if we're talking about moving the tracking out of the software layer into the hardware layer. I mean, Darren, when we're in a situation like that, it doesn't matter what the vendors are saying. You've got a pinpoint accuracy of what the consumer is doing at any given moment, considering the way that 5G works. I mean, yeah. As soon as you handshake to another device, they can clock you within 100 feet. You know, they know exactly where you are and what store you're in and what you're doing in that store. I mean, it's just like the hardware layer and the phone companies are going to have all the power. I mean, it's not going to be up to the local location data vendor. It's going to be up entirely to what the phone companies do. And we know we can't trust the phone companies.
Right. It's going to be the phone companies or the government, and it's going to be local government. I don't think it will be federal government who will push out a privacy law, especially within 2020. When we think about 5G, of course, the technology is building up. We're building the platforms and towers, but that's going to take a while to get sparse nationwide. So when we think about things on a business term year over year, there's still money to be made this year. There's still money to be made next year. And so those loops in privacy and location and all of these things that they're trying to get around is very important for them now, though there is a long term where 5G could take this conversation completely away, but they still have to be aware of, again, the local governments, the federal governments who are listening to consumers, who are having these investigations and who are saying, look, we're being a bit more smarter now in this new decade around what digital media is and what we're actually providing for some of these free services. And so because of that, we're a bit freaked out. Unfortunately, there's going to be conversation on how that gets worked around, which gives the marketers and any other company or government the ability to continue to do what it does, and take advantage of course, 5G when it comes in the future at scale and the loopholes that it has now.
Does anybody else feel the same way about this? I mean, quite frankly, I'm split on my thoughts about 5G, not just about whether or not it's going to work or not, but also from the standpoint of, yeah, it's kind of scary that now the phone companies are in charge of the location data and what that means to us, as far as our privacy. But from a marketing standpoint, that's fantastic. I don't have to deal with a whole bunch of little app vendors, who are tracking via various different means that I'm not really sure about. I have one architecture that's going to give me access to people's movement and helps me market in a much more targeted way. Dan, that's what we've always hoped for, right? I mean, that's just like, that's not
True, but I don't think the ad tech companies are going to go down without a fight.
Right.
I think they're going to want to take care of, keep whatever power that they have right now. And again, going back to what you said originally, 5G, it will be, if it is as revolutionary as the people who are behind it claim it will be, then we're going to want to be part of that. We're going to want to move around in driverless cars and all the other technology advancements, and in healthcare being another big area in which 5G is being touted for. We're going to want to be part of that, and then so we're just going to give up more of that information and more of our location data just to take advantage of everything that it offers, and we may not have a choice.
And I may not have described it well enough too. I said hardware layer, from software layer to hardware layer, but it's really going more to the network layer. And when you're at the network layer, the phone makers, your Android and iOS devices of the world don't have that ability to block that kind of tracking because it's done completely by the carrier. So that makes it so that whatever stance Apple takes, Saul, it doesn't matter in the end, because the phone company is going to decide if they're going to track you.
Yeah, and these are giant conglomerates who part of their revenue stream is selling data and things like that. So like I said, we've all lost. I used to be such a a ray of sunshine on this show, Bob, and now I'm the doom and gloom guy. But and I'm going to make a joke here because I don't remember the whole reference. But hasn't Huawei or Highway, however you pronounce that
Huawei.
hardware kind of, haven't they been tracking their competitors for years with like hidden cameras and things in their offices? It's a bit...
That's what the allegations are. I'm not sure if that's the case or not. Well, we're going to come back and we're going to talk next about how influencers need to be a little bit more socially minded these days to get ad dollars. There's a big movement from a lot of brands to look at their influencers and find out, are they advocating for things? It's an interesting topic. We'll get to it in a minute. But first, I want to bid a fond farewell to our sponsor. Artisanal Agency has been a sponsor of this program since the late summer, I believe. It was a wonderful relationship, and it's just like, and I gave them a few extra weeks because I was so excited to have them with us, and it's the end of the time with us, and I just want to thank them so much for sponsoring the program over the course of the last 3.5 months or so. Lisa has run a fantastic operation over there. If you don't know, Lisa Laporte, who has been on the show many times, is the president CEO of Artisanal Agency and also the Twit.tv network. And she thought it would be a good opportunity to reach out to the media buyers and small brands out there who listen to this program in order to convince them to come on over to their network and have some ads on their network, which is dealing with the technology industry. If you're still in the market for ads here for 2020, I just want to say it's worth giving Lisa a call. It's worth giving her a shout out on email or going to Twitter or however you want to get in touch with her to find out more about how this responsive and lucrative technology-minded audience can make a difference in your advertising. If you don't know Twit.tv by now, you haven't been listening to the program, but I'm going to tell you about it one more time. They got a lot of great shows. Windows Weekly, iOS Today, Mac Break Weekly. They've got Tech News Today. They've got This Week in Tech, which is a phenomenal program. It's kind of their granddaddy of all tech programs. And they've got phenomenal numbers as well. 50 million downloads a year, 70% of that audience directly working in tech, and 82% of them saying that they have bought a product directly as the result of a Twit.tv ad recommendation. I am one of those people. I listen to this show religiously. It's one of my favorites. It's how I modeled my show when I started off. I was so excited about this roundtable discussion format. I copied it and made it my own. That kind of environment, that opportunity for people to just talk openly and then move into an advertisement which is carefully vetted by the people over there and made sure to be exactly the kind of product they want to represent. It feels so genuine and it feels so realistic and it feels so meaningful when they come out and they offer up a product and they say, this is something that I use and you should use it too. It's made me buy a product in the past, and I think that it continues to be one of the best ways for advertisers to get their message out to the public. And, let's talk about that one last time here. It's not just that you get to advertise on Twit.tv. I mean, Artisanal Agency will vet you carefully. They want to make sure that their hosts can offer the brand a genuine recommendation, something that's meaningful, something that's powerful, something that's personal. And at the same time, by doing that, they give you that brand safety. They make sure that you know that your ad is not running against something that you don't want to be associated with. So reach out to them today. Find out what's involved with getting a campaign started on the Twit.tv network. Visit artisanalagency.com to find out more, or email hello@artisanalagency.com. That's hello@artisanalagency.com. Thanks, Lisa, for sponsoring the program. I hope you're listening, and I really appreciate your time and your effort and your dollars. I mean, I really appreciate you putting this effort into our show, and we thank them very much for their support of the BeanCast. Well, influencer marketing may be on the verge of a seismic shift. Brands were once satisfied with audience size and engagement and are starting to feel the pressure from consumers to be represented by people of substance, people who stand for something, who advocate for causes. Saul, is this move toward advocate influencers a real trend, and what, if anything, should brands be doing about it? What are your thoughts on this movement? Is it something that's actually happening, or is it just hype?
So it's a little of both, and there's a couple things to unpack here. Influencers have been shown that to be not as valuable as they once were because the world isn't a fluffy place anymore, and there's also been many studies that show that consumers want brands to stand for something, but most brands they don't want to actually stand for something. They'd rather partner temporarily with influencers to sort of let them stand for something, and they stand behind them with a check and a smile and one of those big kind of foam finger things. Like brands looking to adapt, like influencers need to adapt too, and they see that nobody wants to buy tea, like nobody wants to be the jerk selling tea in Flint, Michigan, and a lot of those like sort of fluffy influencers are losing their way or just losing their dollars. So everyone's trying to adapt, and everyone's trying to follow the path of like the Greta Grunbergs and all these people. The problem is though, there's a much bigger issue that like I said, people want brands to stand for something. Whether you like Nike or not, they stand for something. Whether you liked American Apparel or not, they stood for something. And by just partnering with some of these temporary transactional opportunities, they're not actually standing for anything. They're just, they're buying the communities of these people instead of actually owning the communities, which is really what every company should be aspiring to do.
Go ahead.
There's
No, I was going to say, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, you referenced an article to us, and Saul mentioned it earlier, that a couple of examples were Malala and Greta Thunberg. And, the minute they start advocating for brands, they're going to quickly lose whatever hard-won credibility that they have. And I think that that's going to be a very big problem if you have these advocates start becoming influencers for brands. I mean, I'll give you one example. Think about Al Gore. No matter whether you love him or hate him, he's been talking about the environment for decades, but all of his haters think he has conflicts of interest everywhere, and that hurts his credibility. And I think that anybody who comes in and starts using their influence to advocate for positions had better be very careful about what they advocate for.
But I think
go ahead, Saul.
that I sort of where I got this topic from, it wasn't that brands are going to start sponsoring these newsmakers, because exactly what you said, it'll people will sniff it out and it'll be awful for both sides of the partnership. What I see it as is some of these tier one influencers who are all of a sudden seeing like I don't know, the fat Jew or the Kardashians or all these people that are getting stupid money for a single post. All of a sudden they have to have an opinion, or they feel they have to have an opinion, and brands want them to have an opinion because the brands don't have an opinion. And I see that a lot. Like it's going to end badly.
I agree with Saul.
Yeah.
I agree with Saul. Yeah, they have to be advocates for it themselves. Saul said it absolutely correctly. They're just trying to mask what they're not doing internally and externally in for influencers, and those cases, many of those influencers are not as aligned with those cases either. And if you do work with influencers who are advocates for particular cases, they may not work with those brands because they know those brands are not advocates in whole as someone who would stand for this by themselves. So Saul is absolutely correct. Brands want to do this, but they need to invest that money internally into figuring out how can we stand for this, how can we make sure that we create some message where it's consumers know what we are and who we stand for, but they don't want to do that. Someone could argue that by investing into influencers, they are doing that, but it's a cheap way, and it's also a very temporary way to solve a very large and permanent issue.
You know,
And we also all know. Sorry, Bob. I'll just throw.
I'm going to get in here eventually and
you,
get my thought.
yeah, you'll get your show back in a second. But you know that nobody lives their actual life online. So these brands invest in influencers, and then maybe the influencer gets in trouble with the law or a little scandal or something, and the whole thing was for nothing. When the going back to my point over and over, if the brands just stood for something, they wouldn't have to do all this due diligence, and they wouldn't have to lose sleep at night because some guy did something they weren't supposed to.
But you run that risk with even celebrities, never mind influencers. I mean, the influencers.
But celebrities, I put celebrities and influencers in the exact same bucket. Yeah. You're just buying audience, not influence.
You know what? My trouble with all this is that I think we're giving consumers a little bit too much credit. It's just like when you do a survey, when you find out what your consumers are saying, they always say things that make them look good. So they're always saying things like, oh, yes, we're very much interested in having someone who represents our causes and believes in the things that we believe and doesn't, support these things that we disagree with. Yet the reality is you put this product in the hands of a bikini girl and you're going to get most of the 20-year-old guys to buy the product. I mean, it's still just from an influencer standpoint, it's still marketing and advertising and appealing to the basis needs of a consumer. It's not necessarily always high-minded as far as our decision-making is going. So from a branding standpoint, it looks really good to be associated with causes and people who handle those causes, but from a marketing standpoint, influencer marketing won't change a bit. I can't see it changing a bit when it comes down to it, because it's still effective to go get that guy who's jumping off of cliffs and that person who's racing cars around a track. I mean, whoever's doing these amazing, cool things is still going to have all the attention. Darren, am I wrong with that? I mean, it sounds to me.
But they have a specific audience, right? Those two individuals that you just named have a specific audience and who follows them, right? Like many audiences, the Kardashians have a very specific audience. I know we all follow them because we're amused at them, but we're entertained, right? About who they are. I mean, we being, used lightly, but what I'm saying is we being used lightly, but what I'm saying is that every influencer has an audience. If we go to someone like an influencer like, I'm just blanking. Let's just go to Will Smith, right? He has an audience. Someone different than that of K. Michelle, who is not as known, but has a completely different audience in the southern region, with people who have went to HBCUs, who are part of Greek organizations, who have a large buying power, who she could then work with a brand, as she's worked with whiskey before, and connecting them to an audience that they never have really pursued innately, and then of course increasing a particular portion of the pie that they've never had. So when we think about working with certain influencers, I don't think that, of course, when we think about causes, we go into environmental or things that are connected to the community, which we should. But Saul is correct. I think the brand has to have that focus and that desire to pinpoint themselves to say, we want to focus on this. And if they then go to influencers who are connected to that mission and say, hey, this is our mission, we like to communicate our mission to people in your audience because you're connected to this mission, then that's perfect. That is marketing and advertising. But if they're just going to someone and saying, hey, can you create a campaign for us, and then throwing it out and doing nothing else with it from an ongoing perspective, then it's just all talk and no action.
Oh, good points. Good points on all that, because it's just like, I think that when we're talking about the difference between advertising and marketing, brand building is still an important factor, and we need to keep aware of that. But marketing is a whole nother piece of this puzzle that needs to be addressed in a whole different way. Well, we're going to move on to the next topic. Google caught a lot of heat this past week for testing a new format for displaying ads, which is virtually indistinguishable from search results. It's always been the battle on their front to try to get more of us to click on their ads. So, Darren, obviously, name of the game in the end Um, but
Just to get
obviously,
clicks.
yeah. I mean, clicks are the name of the game. But I mean, and there's obviously some concerns for consumers in this, but
Mm,
clicks matter most, right? I mean, it's just like
right.
this isn't a bad thing that they're doing, even though they've gotten a lot of bad press for it. What are your thoughts on Google's move?
To be honest, I have two thoughts from a marketer perspective. Of course, it's a move that gets more clicks. It's always a great move, right? From a consumer perspective, the user experience or interface is just a bit better, right? I did not like the box, the yellow box, and the blatant like, "Hey, this is an ad in your face." Google's moving to what again other digital media companies have moved to before, native advertising and everything, where it's just a small sponsored content or small ad there. People also, I think consumers, again, are smarter around Google, understanding that Google has many of the first search results as ads, right? So either you're going to engage with that or you're not. But does the layout make it easier and a better flow? Yes. Now I can see the blowback because of the fact that it's less blatant and it's less in your face. But I think the reason they're getting better, more clicks is because of that fact, right? The user experience is just a bit better, and it's easier and smoother to consume, is what I can really call.
What I get a sense is that they're taking a page from Amazon because Amazon is.
Yeah.
If you have you looked at the Amazon page lately, if you've ever looked for any sort of a product or do a search, it's all about subterfuge. I mean, you can type in a product that you're looking for, and it'll be the 10th result down because you're going to have to scroll through a whole bunch of sponsored ads and product listings that have been paid for, and it's obviously getting people to try to buy a product other than the one they're looking for, and sometimes it's subtle and sometimes it's very blatant. But it sounds like Google wants to do very much the same thing. Is provide I don't have a real problem with the new format where it just says ad, ad, ad. I get that it's going to be an ad, but obviously they're trying to get people to click on those.
And yet they got so much hassle for it. I mean, it seems like the move was not dramatic. I mean, yeah, they took away the yellow box. They didn't make it obvious that it was so obvious that it was an advertisement. Yeah, I can understand how that could be considered to be tricking a consumer. But Saul, I mean, we all know what Google's doing overall. I mean, it's just like we all know that Google has moved in big ways, in big movements with their algorithm to try to enhance relevancy. If you've run an ad campaign on a Google network, you know that those ads don't necessarily show up where you want them to show up because Google has to vet you for accuracy, for relevancy, for making sure that this ad is going to be part of the search results that this consumer is seeing. So in some ways, this is just elevating the advertisement's importance in the relevance ranking, right? I mean, it's that ad is maybe an ad, but it's still relevant to the consumer's search. So why shouldn't it have a prominent position in the viewable area of the consumer's attention?
So I agree with the relevancy, but one thing that none of us have brought up yet, and I thought it was the most obvious and would be the first topic. You guys are talking about design and UI and everything like that. The thing that stuck out for me when I read this story was the fact that Alphabet or Google, whatever you want to call them, their ad revenue has decreased every quarter in 2019. So, you guys keep talking about it's just to get people to click on more things, as if it's the effort that it takes to click on the ad. I think this is a way to just trick a lot of people into pushing up their revenue. They can say that they got more clicks and drive more traffic. Excuse me. Their stocks are down. They're looking at different ways to never mind the relevancy of the ads. Talk about the relevancy of their ad placement and their ad whole platform. These are just different little ways to show themselves to be still the king, still the leader, and where you should be spending all your money and not spend it all on Facebook, Instagram, Amazon, wherever other people are spending their money. Stock is down on Google, so they're willing to try anything, I'm sure. It's not an easy position to be in, to be the leader of a company that size with such high revenue and expectation. But at the same time, I kind of smiled when I saw, and I saw this mentioned twice, that they were testing this. A test would be with a small sample, or at least a sample of some kind. And from everything I could tell, this was a full platform push. So that's hardly a test in my eyes.
Yeah, for me, I think the revenue conversation, this is the least dramatic change Google could make, in my opinion. When we think of Google as an ad tech company, right, and its competitor, which is Facebook mostly, Facebook has all of these products. They're always iterating different products, and we really don't see a lot of pushback on that end on the products that they have that they're testing out, as far as WhatsApp and Instagram and the stories, right? But Google has a finite amount of products that it's working with, though, of course, it's large and very profitable. So for them to make that change to increase profit, for me, it makes sense and is really, like you said, it's a part of their game to increase their revenue. But as an ad tech company, it's, for me, the least dramatic change that they could make at this time.
Do you see this as being something that consumers as a whole are outraged about, or is this just the press that's covering this particular sector? Because it feels like if clicks were up and nobody was offended by this other than a few journalists who were pointing it out, it doesn't seem like they need to do that much different from this to go forward. I mean, they said they're going to pull this and they're going to iterate this design, which means they're not going to do much to it because it's working for them. It seems like it's a really good move overall, and it's not really offending anybody. It's still clearly denoted as an ad. It's still delivering relevant results to the consumer. It's still, something that we're already used to. We know that those first few results are going to be ads. It doesn't seem like they've overstepped their bounds here at all.
Remember when Google changed its logo, the E, like just maybe even a small inch up, and it was like all over the press? I feel like this is a bit above that, but it's in the same instance, really.
Well, good points, all. Well, we're going to move on to the final topic. The Super Bowl has been becoming the venue where advertisers like to kill off, then reinvent their brand mascots or spokespeople. A few years ago, it was William Shatner who was killed, I think in some kind of bizarre scenario. For Travelocity, what's he for? Priceline. It was Priceline. And it's just like now this year the big buzz is about the Planters Peanuts gentleman being killed in a car crash, a horrible car crash of the Peanut Mobile. I got to ask you, Dan, an article in SB Nation this past week questions the wisdom of this and wonders if it sends the wrong message. Do they have a point, or is this just more Super Bowl hype stuff and we should really not think too deeply into it? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, when I saw this article, I couldn't think of William Shatner being killed off as the Priceline spokesman, and perhaps his contract was up or whatever. So I don't necessarily look at this as a trend of any kind. I suspect that this is obviously the Mr. Peanut thing is going to be a teaser stunt. They'll reincarnate him. They'll reinvent him. They'll say he's not dead. I kind of really don't care one way or another. I didn't find it all that compelling. All I'll say is that they better have a decent payoff for this during the game, because it's one thing to portray a mascot or a critter in a new light, giving them a new personality, like Colonel Sanders for KFC has been reinvented many times. But I'm not a big fan of playing with actual death as an ad concept. I think that there's better ideas out there.
So two things. One, they'll bring back Mr. Peanut as a honey roasted peanut, so he'll have a darker complexion to appeal to a wider audience. But secondly, the big problem here is that Super Bowl ads are not about selling products anymore. They're about owning the Entertainment Tonight conversation and owning the conversation about who won the Super Bowl in the ad department. So there's a book. It's probably about 15 years old. I haven't read it in maybe 10 years, but it's called Your Marketing Sucks. And in the book, the one thing that stuck with me in the book was it was always about agencies who promise to win you awards aren't really interested in your company. They're interested in their company. And I kind of get the feeling now that like Super Bowl agencies or agencies that specialize in Super Bowl ads aren't really in it for the company anymore. They're in it for the hype. They're in it for the awards. They're in it for the sizzle, because I haven't seen a single Super Bowl ad that's made me want to go buy something. I've talked about them. I thought they were interesting or cool, but nothing's been made me want to like change my brand preference, because I don't think that's the goal anymore.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation, but you're exactly right. I mean, Super Bowl, it's about the week before now with teasers, and it's also about, the day after on the morning shows. Every creative director in every small town is going to go onto a morning show and talk about his or her 5 favorite ads, and pretty much by the end of the week, I promise you by the end of the week after the Super Bowl, you'll be hard pressed to remember half a dozen ads that you saw, even if you're watching intently.
Or those small town creative directors.
Yeah. And, I've always had the opinion that I think Super Bowl advertising should be a launch spot for a longer campaign, even 6 months or a year out. But these are just one-offs, 2 week one-offs. And I think it's a waste. I think a lot of it is a waste of money.
Darren, what are your thoughts? I mean, it's just like this whole thing about killing your mascot kind of reeks of, just stunt marketing. It doesn't really, come across as being a really effective method of getting attention in the end. And I'm wondering too about what Dan was saying about the macabre aspects of it. Does it actually make the brand look bad or worse in the end because they did something to a character that's obviously been beloved in some way for a number of years?
Yeah, I think it was just corny. I mean, I also think for especially the Peanut brand that it was a waste of their social capital. Particularly, especially if they get a lot of their earned media from a channel like Twitter, right? Which they could have definitely launched something else, whatever product they're launching at the Super Bowl. For me, I think that they could have done something else. I say that because their Twitter voice is very witty, is very like out there. They had many different layers they could have explored. So for this to be one, I think it's just it's interesting, and we know they'll bring it back and they'll revive it. That's usually the trope there, right? But I'm unmoved about it.
Well,
I don't feel any way about it, honestly.
And I just want to put a poll out. Who believes that the Planters peanut guy is dead? I don't believe it. I mean, it's just like this is a teaser for some kind of bigger story where the peanut guy survives. I mean, it's just like there's no way that they killed him off in this commercial. I guess we all agree. Well, with that, go ahead.
Go. No, I was going to say it takes a lot of guts, and I think Saul and I had a conversation earlier this week on Twitter. I think he proposed killing off a mascot. It takes a lot of guts to do that.
So can I have 30 seconds to tell you my pitch?
Oh, sure.
In 2008, I was working for a company called FreshBooks, and we had our mascot was just a guy. It was like a guy with a briefcase who was a persona of our customers. And one day the CEO said we should kill Ivan. Ivan was his name. And I pitched that we leave him in our banner ads. This is when people bought banner ads and stuff like that. We leave him in the banner ads for 6 months, and he keeps getting thinner and thinner and thinner until he's in a chair because he can't stand up, and then he just falls over one day, and we just never reference it. And then like a week later, we released a press release that he passed away, and now our mascot's a squirrel. But they didn't bite on it. I still think it's the funniest thing I've ever come up with.
If you think wasting away from some kind of debilitating disease is funny, so that would be a great thing for them to do.
Yeah.
Oh, but better a peanut is driving a car.
And with that, it's time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug, starting with the man himself, Saul Colt. You can find him at theideaintegration.company.com. No. Well, I was about to say .co and I got confused. The ideaintegration.com. Am I right about that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Well, if you've got a mascot that you'd like to contract a horrible virus, we don't just kill mascots. We do a lot of unusual and out there creative stuff. Doing a lot of branded content and video, podcasting, events. Year-long marketing strategies. We do pretty much everything. So, if you have a question, you want to reach out, love to hear from anybody. We have a bit of a window of time where we're accepting new projects. So please reach out at theideaintegration.com.
And next up, we have Dan Goldgeier. You can find him at dangoldgeier.com. That's where you can hire him to be your copywriter. You can also read his books because he has fantastic books on advertising and marketing. Tell us what's going on in your world, Dan. What would you like to promote?
Yeah, absolutely. In turn, occasionally still contributing to Talent Zoo and adpulp.com. But you can go on to Amazon and buy one of my books, including Killer Executions and Scrub Decks, an outside the box look at obnoxious advertising and marketing jargon. And as always, all proceeds of the sales of my book go to feed my dog.
I told you he was a dog owner. And last but not least, Darren Martin. You can find him at streamlinedmedia. It's a .co. Am I correct about that?
Yes, .co.
Yeah, .co. So streamlinedmedia.co. That's where he is the chairman, and you're also the president and CEO. I'm confused about your titles, but you're in charge. You're the man who founded the
Bold
place.
Culture, yes. So Streamline is just the parent company of Bold Culture, but I definitely want to talk about Bold Culture now since we have many different months coming up. Brands, of course, should be celebrating and championing these communities yearly, but of course Black History, Women's History, Latinx, and LGBTQ month are coming up in 2020 quite rapidly. If you don't have any plans to address that both internally as well as externally for consumers, you can reach out to Bold Culture at boldculture.co, and we'll definitely work with you. We work with managers to create inclusive environments as well as creating marketing campaigns for Black, Latinx, and LGBTQ audiences. So again, it's boldculture.co, and we'd love to work with you. And thanks, Bob, for having me again.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm really glad that you can make it back on the program. As for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me, and you can even find out how to advertise on this program. We obviously have an open slot now, so we'd love to have you on as a sponsor. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And now it's time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul, a rundown of the best and worst of advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. First up, the fair of the week. And this was kind of interesting, Dan, because it's just like, I don't think they intended this as a fundraising vehicle or for it to go viral, but a North Carolina animal rescue posted a picture of a cat named Perdita on Facebook and gave her the distinction of the world's worst cat with a great line, "We thought she was sick. Turns out she's just a jerk." The shelter described the cat as one who doesn't like kittens, dogs, or children. I love this ad. It was really great. And it's turned into a viral sensation. The ad I saw, they said they had raised $600, but I think it's probably gone up from there. What's your thoughts on this?
Well, I've adopted a couple dogs, as I like to mention, and dogs and cats get very, very good social traction. People just want to feel good about them. Even the ugly, remember Ugly Cat or whatever that was, Grumpy Cat. It's the quirky dogs and the quirky cats of the world who can't get adopted. If they get the right attention, boy, people love it. People eat it up.
Well, now for the fail of the week. This is an old story, but it was just shared on Twitter, so it's kind of got some relevance right now, and it shows the failure of an ad agency during the layoff process. Ryan Durr, who used to work at the Martin agency, tells this great story about selling through a script for a digital extension to the raccoons ad from Geico. If you're not familiar with Geico advertisements, they do this really funny series of ads involving raccoons who like to cook, and they're using garbage as their types of cooking materials. So they had zero budget, and they did this whole shoot in-house at the agency with one camera and him puppeteering the raccoon paws, and they literally used leftover food from their home. It had no budget. It was that type of shoot. Now, the day of the shoot, an important client is in town to observe. He's working the puppet paws of this video, Ryan is, and he's called suddenly to a mandatory meeting. And when he goes to that meeting, there's only one person in the room, and they sit him down and they say, "Hey, things are bad. Sorry, but we're letting you go." And he's not believing it and says, "No, we're serious." And then he says, "What about the shoot?" And they go, "What shoot?" "The one I'm running right now for Geico." Some more awkward silence. And then they leave the room and return to tell me that they'll find someone to cover for me. And he says, "Kay, can I get my bag? My keys are in it." And they ask, "Where is it?" It's like right next to the client. And they use an expletive and they go, he goes back to them, "You didn't think this one out all the way, huh?" I love this story so much, the way it went down and everything, because it's just like they had to come in, they took the bag away from him right in front of the client. They fired him basically right in front of the client, right under the client's nose in the middle of this situation. Saul, this is just par for the course, right? This is the way big companies think. They don't think through the process sometimes.
Well, so it's par for the course, but it's also, a little bit of shame on Geico. They watched this whole thing go down. It's like I realize that, it's big business and nobody really cares about anything. It's all cover your own ass. But they literally bought the pitch from this person. This person is the shepherding them through this whole process, and that person's not there anymore. And they went on to do, I think, another year's worth of the same concept. And I totally understand the concept's owned by the agency and it's owned by the brand or whatever. It's not his individual concept, but man, how come nobody stood up for anybody in this story?
Yeah, I thought this was just a great
makes the Martin agency look very bad, and let me tell you, there's no worse feeling than getting bounced out of an agency and being at home and watching commercials that you've done for them on the air. And it's been a long time since I've had that sensation, but yes, and not as badly went down as what happened to Ryan, but I think it shows the lack of power that I assume he was a junior or mid-level employee. And then you can't go back to Geico. You can't go back. You really can't do much if they just escort you out of the place.
And this was some time ago too. We'll put that in perspective. I mean, this is I think 7 years ago, but it's still really.
I'm sure it's gotten way better.
Yeah, I'm sure it's way better now for that. Well, the foul of the week, YouTube moderators apparently have been forced to sign PTSD waivers on the job. Darren, the way this story is unfolding, it looks like it's a consultancy, one of the management consultancies running this operation that is a contract operation for moderators of the content. And they're seeing a lot of horrible content when you're moderating content on YouTube, Facebook, that type of thing. You're seeing a lot of content, but being forced to sign a waiver about your PTSD as a result of on-the-job work, it seems like it's pretty crappy.
Yeah, it's very crappy. And my question is, and I didn't see a word mentioned in the article that you sent over, are they providing therapy sessions or opportunities for people to be able to work through these things that they see internally? And the question most likely is no, right? And I think that goes back into we talk about being for something. I think the base level is understanding that moderators have this job to look at some very gruesome content, and we can do whatever we can in order to support our individuals who have to take on this task. Unfortunately, because people work as far as a business, you got to keep things low. Things like that are cut or not even considered when you're trying to work, especially with contractors, and sometimes especially if they're the consultant agencies, either employees or they're contractors of the employees, which means that they have to get their own care. And we understand that freelance care is very expensive and it's very hard to get and maintain. So I say all that to say it's crazy. It's actually ludicrous, and I think that YouTube itself and or the consultant agency that it's working with needs to create structures where the people who are looking at these things are supported somehow, especially if they sign that waiver. Of course, I may have, an opportunity to, I may get PTSD from this, but how am I being supported after that, right? That's kind of crazy for me to just sign that I may get this and you not tell me how you're going to support me if I do.
Did you guys see there's like a Tom Hanks interview like a year ago where he was talking, somebody mentioned like in the interview that like he's universally beloved, and his comment was, he goes, no, whenever I feel too good about myself, I just go read YouTube comments of my movies. And it just proves that it's a horrible place.
Yeah, it's crazy. That Instagram is not better, and Facebook isn't as better either with the comments.
Well, have a suggestion for this list or just want to discuss it? Comment online. Use the hashtag FairFailFoul. That's #FairFailFoul. And that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcast listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on the Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
You know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. It's just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, you know, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.